When two planes are engaged in a dogfight, the advantage of having a better plane can definitely make a difference, but that's only true to a certain point. The final outcome of the duel is ultimately decided by the pilot's skills, bravery, and tenacity. This is what the pilots of the U.S. Navy and Marines are taught in the Navy Fighter Weapons School, the popular TopGun course. It's a place where pilots get their PhD in air combat skills. If it hadn't been for the substandard combat performance of inexperienced U.S. pilots in Vietnam during the late 1960s, the TopGun school might never have been formed. The Vietnam War Crisis. On March 2, 1965, the United States administration commenced Operation Rolling Thunder with a goal of applying pressure against the North Vietnamese government that was supplying weapons and equipment to the communist insurgents in South Vietnam. A mighty force during World War II and the Korean War, American fighter pilots were now performing below every expectation in North Vietnam. During World War II, the U.S. Navy aircraft had up to a 15-to-1 overall kill ratio against the Japanese in the Pacific. In the Korean War, where the Navy's Sabre fighters were pitted against the enemy MiG-15s, their kill ratio was somewhere between 7 and 14-to-1. This fell dramatically during the campaign in Vietnam, where it was only 2.5-to-1 and even fell below 1-to-1 in the final stages of the operation. This poor kill ratio was disconcerting for Navy commanders, especially as their pilots were flying far superior planes than their adversaries, namely F-4 Phantoms and F-8 Crusaders against the enemy's obsolete subsonic MiG-17s and MiG-21s. The Alt report. The numbers were so deplorable that the Chief of Naval Operations ordered a study to be conducted on air-to-air missile performance. The task was given to World War II veteran Captain Frank Alt, who composed a detailed overview, the so-called Alt report. He approached the different aspects of the problem, including the quality of the missiles but also the expertise and competency of the air crew to actually use the missiles to their full potential. One of his main conclusions was that American pilots lacked experience and skills in air combat maneuvering, that is, the capability to manipulate their aircraft into a position most suitable to attack the enemy aircraft. In order to enhance their skills, especially in maneuvering, Captain Alt proposed the formation of the Advanced Fighter Weapons School. Birth of TopGun. The Navy used to have a similar training unit called the Fleet Air Gunnery Unit, but that became obsolete with the introduction of modern missiles and disbanded in 1960. Fortunately, the Navy was already considering forming a new such training center at the Miramar Naval Air Station. The Miramar base was the home of the Pacific Fleet Fighter Squadron and was popularly known as Fighter Town, since the majority of the Navy fighters were stationed there. After only 2 months of the Alt report's conclusion, the school started on March 3, 1969, at Miramar. At first, the school was organized within the VF-121, the Pacemakers training squadron for F-4s for the Pacific Fleet. The task of forming the school was given to Lieutenant Commander Dan Peterson, who, along with 8 other instructors and 1 intelligence officer, established an office and a classroom in an old trailer. In those early days, the school only survived thanks to the personal efforts of those officers who spent many hours studying tactics, gathering intelligence on enemy aircraft, and practicing dogfights while preparing lessons for the first class of candidates that were arriving that same month. The candidates were picked among the best pilots from each of the Navy and Marines fighter squadrons. In July 1972, 4 years after the program had started, the unit gained standalone status as the United States Navy Fighter Weapons School, or NFWS for short. It was primarily thanks to the effort of the instructors that the school had established itself as synonymous with top-quality training. The results were there to prove it. Once the air campaign continued over North Vietnam in 1972, the overall kill ratio rose to an incredible 13-to-1. Clearly, the performance of the Navy and Marine pilots had increased significantly, and the NFWS was fulfilling its mission, which was not only to create skilled fighter pilots but also ones that would be able to pass on their newfound skills to other pilots once they had returned to their squadrons. Evolution of the school. When the war in Vietnam ended, the NFWS continued to thrive. As the years passed, the experience and capability of the instructors was elevated, and they constantly worked on upgrading the training curriculum. The training also evolved over the following decades along with the development of aerial warfare. In 1986, by which time night air engagements were becoming more widespread, the NFWS added nighttime training missions to the curriculum. A decade later, air-to-ground missile training was added following the increased engagement of pilots in ground target missions. In 1996, the famous Miramar Naval Air Station was transferred over to the Marine Corps, which meant that the TopGun facility had to move out. The school found a new home at Naval Air Station Fallon in Nevada, where it was incorporated into the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, or NSOC for short. The selection process. TopGun was anything but a school for rookie pilots. It was not a place where men learned to fly a fighter but where they honed their newly taught skills to perfection. Flying skills were at the top of the list of the potential candidates' references, but their intellectual capabilities were also of great importance. Future Top Guns were supposed to not only learn advanced air combat maneuvering but also how to successfully pass the knowledge gained onto their fellow pilots back in their own squadrons. The course. The successful candidates arrived at Miramar in their own aircraft. The course initially lasted for 4 weeks but more recently has been extended to 9 weeks. During their stay, the candidates attend both theory classes and practical exercises. Throughout their many hours of lectures, the fighter pilots receive a whole spectrum of theoretical knowledge about their aircraft, contemporary tactical trends, maneuvering techniques, and others. They also become familiar with the intelligence data gathered on enemy aircraft. All classes were educated to precise details and were tested and marked by the notorious murder board, where they had to deliver a detailed lecture on a select subject that they were given in front of their classmates. The goal of these lectures was to provide pilots with a full insight into their own and the enemy aircraft's capabilities in the air. Only once they had mastered this knowledge could they be able to overcome any situation that could occur in battle and become successful combat dogfighters. The 1v1 training. The core of the practical course was the one-on-one, 1v1 training, a duel in the air between an instructor and the student. The training was based on the concept of dissimilar air combat training, which meant that the instructors were flying inferior aircraft that were supposed to imitate enemy fighter planes. Even though the students had the technical advantage, it was the huge experience that the instructors possessed that was prevailing in combat. It was common practice that an instructor flying an F-4 could easily defeat a student in an F-14. As noted by one of the Top Gun graduates, it was like a race between an Olympic medal winner versus a high school athlete. The students' chances of being successful in a dogfight with their instructors began to increase after a couple of weeks of intense training. Besides the number of maneuvers and tricks they learned, the students always had one thought from the 1v1 training in their mind: it was never to lose sight of their adversary. Instructors always stressed, if you lose sight, you lose the fight. The aircraft. During more than half a century of its existence, the NFWS program has seen a variety of aircraft used. Back in the late 1960s, it all began with 2 aircraft, the A-4E Skyhawk and the T-38 Talon. These 2 were favored by the instructors as the training aircraft at the time. The A-4, as a light subsonic aircraft, was a perfect match for the Soviet subsonic MiG-17, while the T-38 was an ideal adversary for the MiG-21. It was against these 2 Soviet aircraft that the Navy and Marine pilots were fighting over North Vietnam. The 2 aircraft remained in Top Gun service for a long time, with the T-38 later being replaced with the F-5. Other aircraft were also introduced, such as the A-6 Intruder, the F-106, and the Israeli KFIR F-21. With the introduction of a 4th generation of fighter aircraft, this meant the end for the A-4s and the F-5s, even though many countries were still using the MiG-21s. New threats appeared on the scene, such as the MiG-29 and the Su-27 in the late 1980s. In order to match these Soviet aircraft, the NFWS decided to include the modified F-16s into their fleet. This aircraft is still in use on the TopGun courses today. A legendary dogfight. Forming the fighter weapons school at Miramar brought a much-needed change to the tactics that were used in aerial warfare during the Vietnam War. After flight operations were restored in 1972, the Navy pilots returned to their duties as a formidable force. The lessons learned at Miramar were priceless, and adding to their experience in combat against the North Vietnamese, from that period comes one of the most legendary dogfight stories in the history of naval aviation. The hero of the story was Lieutenant Randy "Duke" Cunningham, who was not a TopGun graduate himself but had trained 1v1 with the Miramar instructors and later actually completed the course. On May 10, 1972, Duke was returning from a flak suppression mission in his F-4 Phantom when he spotted an incoming MiG-17. The bandit was the notorious Colonel Toon, a North Vietnamese fighter ace accredited with 13 American kills. The encounter quickly turned into a fierce duel, with both pilots taking aggressive action. The two aircraft entered into a vertical rolling scissors defensive maneuver, which involves pulling your plane up into a spiral towards the enemy plane, trying to make them overshoot. This results in the two aircraft barrel rolling around each other, trying to gain an advantage over the other. At one point, Toon had the initiative and forced Duke to pull out of the fight in order to negotiate a better offensive position and then return directly to face his enemy. Both planes went into a vertical climb, but then Duke made a skillful maneuver of dragging his throttles to idle and pulling his speed brakes on. His speed decreased almost 150 knots. Toon failed to react to the maneuver and found himself with Duke on his tail. Toon then made a turn towards the ground, hoping that any heat sources down there might disrupt the heat-seeking missile if the F-4 fired one at him. Having the enemy in his sights, Duke fired an AIM-9 Sidewinder at the other plane, and thinking that he had missed his target, he prepared to fire another missile when suddenly the MiG-17 burst into a fireball. Black smoke poured from it. Toon didn't eject. It was the third MiG that Duke had destroyed that day, but on their return flight back to base, his F-4 got hit by a ground-fired SAM missile. Both Duke and his backseat radar intercept officer, William Driscoll, managed to eject safely into the sea, where they were later picked up and rescued. Legacy. For the next 5 decades, maneuvers like this one have been the trademark of TopGun graduates, making them the best of the best pilots in the world. In 2004, U.S. Navy pilot Becky Calder became the first female pilot to get selected for the Navy's Fighter Weapons School and, after graduating, went on to have a successful career as a pilot until her retirement. The TopGun School continues to produce the world's finest fighter pilots, ensuring that when American aviators enter combat, they do so with skills, knowledge, and confidence that can make the difference between victory and defeat. The lessons learned in those trailers at Miramar in 1969 continue to save lives and win battles decades later.